I originally came to Mongolia as a sort of volunteer for an American organization. I was doing in the countryside, living traditional Mongolian lifestyle in Mongolian gear with a Mongolian family on their property while I was teaching English and doing some health projects. And that went from 2009 to 2010. 2011. And that was the year I concluded my service, and I thought I would take my journalism experience from America and try to become a reporter in Mongolia, which I felt was an interesting place at the time with a growing economy, and there was a lot of interest without a lot of reporting. Definitely the culture of the exchange of information is different. Um, okay, so there's a language barrier, of course. I was lucky enough to learn enough Mongolian that I can make a quick phone call and get in touch with the people I need to. I don't do interviews in Mongolian language because of I have limits to my capacity, but I can make those initial hellos and can I meet you here and now. So I find that is a lot more informal in Mongolia because if you go kind of the cold call route where you're just calling the ministry of whatever, it can be kind of challenging to get in touch with the person you need to talk to. So in Mongolia, networking is really important to get immediate answers to what you want, because if you try just calling the ministry at the time of your report, you may not get an answer until next week. So what needs to be, I think the government, I wish would appreciate more, or even companies even, is that news has to be new, and that it's not okay for me to write my story 5 days after an event occurred. So I think it's best for everyone. The Mongolian government has interest in it too, to get its side of a situation expressed in international media. So that's a big challenge, getting timely comments from all the stakeholders. Is it easier? It's more direct. Um, well, okay. So if you don't know the people you're calling beforehand, it can be more of a direct process where you call you call the organization. Maybe a secretary picks up. You say you want to talk to this department, etc. In Mongolia, when that happens, maybe someone's not manning the phone at the moment, or maybe they're actually not hired to do that job. They're just watching the phone, so they don't know what to do when actually a journalist calls. And a lot of departments don't actually have, a lot of organizations don't have a department with dealing with media, and that's a big difference too. Mongolia doesn't have trained public relations officers that know, how to actually deal with a query. Maybe they don't know the answer to it, or maybe they don't know directly who to go to for that. So they might just get confused or embarrassed and hang up the phone. That happens sometimes. I think something that happens in Mongolia is a lot of journalists have trouble taking themselves out of a story. Um, it's really important in ethics, especially, it's more. So in Western journalism, at big media groups, ethics are really important, and it's important to be be objective about what you're reporting on and not put yourself in the middle of the story. I mean, you're reporting on everything, but you should still be kind of outside of it so you can give that objective interpretation of what's occurring. Um, there's subtle things in Mongolia, even you see it in the language. People have a hard time disconnecting what's going on in the country from their own feelings and their ties to the country. In text, you often see the phrase "our Mongolia," and that's just kind of a small symptom of this problem where people can't separate themselves from how they're being affected by problems in the country or how they perceive it, and actually what's a more global look at what's going on in this country. So Mongolia, I would like to say Ulaanbaatar is a small town, but Mongolia is a small town. I mean, it's a huge country, and there is quite a bit of diversity, from Dornad to Bayanolgi. But uh, getting in touch with the people you need to is, in a lot of ways, easier than the States because there is so many ties to people. Um, one organization might work very closely with their counterpart in a province, for example. And so, going to networking events, you can meet a variety of decision makers and the heads of companies and important government officials. It happens all the time. So it's really easy, actually, to put yourself in the middle of things and find the kind of people that can help you with your stories. Okay, so, you know, things get kind of comes in ebbs and flows. I talked about how it's difficult sometimes to engage government for when I want to do a story and I want to get their comment expressing their opinion of what's actually happening or their interpretation. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. But also that's something that gets better and worse depending on the administrations. Some governments that I've worked with in the past have been prioritizing their engagement with the foreign media because they do see it as an important thing. Other governments, whether or not they're ignorant to how important this is, or they think they need to protect themselves, I can't guess. But other governments don't do the same effort to engage, putting in people with uh, various language abilities. Not just English, but Chinese is a really important one. Xinhua is in Mongolia, and they write often about what's going on in the country, and it's actually super important what they're writing because China is such an important trade partner to Mongolia. So it's not just the abilities to engage journalism, it's how important decision makers in government feel it is to even manage their relationship with media. Um, Professionally and personally, nothing really jumps at my mind today. Everyone has a bad day, I suppose. Um, I'm not really the kind of person that likes to quit because they're having a bad day or a hissy fit. There are days. There was just a protest last weekend for the air pollution, and I'm sitting there, and my gloves are on because I'm not working with the camera that day, but I do have to take notes. So I have to take off my gloves and put them back on, and I try to take my notes when I take my gloves off, and the ink is frozen and nothing's working, and the camera is not working properly because it's that cold where you can't focus the picture properly. And so there are some frustrating days, and the cold really makes it challenging when you're trying to engage people on the street for sure. I've been fortunate enough to work with Mongolian journalists. I think the biggest change is people are more internationally minded, and they do realize that you know there is a media outside Mongolia, and it is important to acknowledge it. You see, I think today a lot more reprints of stories the international media is writing about Mongolia, not just Reuters, but Bloomberg, Associated Press, AFP, all of these. So I think that's a big difference that people are actually um, thinking about how the world actually thinks about Mongolia, rather than kind of in the past it used to be how we think the world should think about Mongolia, and that's not. It sounds similar. It's just a few words difference, but the the actual intangible gap is pretty big. I do not usually traditional newspapers. I look more at things like Zasik.mn and Parliament.mn that have straight um, news from the source. Because for my job, I can't as easily cite Toin.mn or iToin or GoGo that in the Mongolian language because it's still kind of removed from the original source and there's distortion there. It's so it's really important when I'm doing my reporting that I need to get the exact transcript of events from Parliament workers or Parliament spokesperson or a cabinet spokesperson or the minister themselves. Okay, so in the past 50 years, there's been a lot more reliance on protected sources, and I think the big example was Watergate, Deep Throat, and that's always been stuck in, especially the American mindset of what reporting is. And I actually don't have a huge problem with it. When I was a younger journalist working with older editors, they kind of resented this idea. I think it's has to be balanced. What so I don't so it's two things. I don't necessarily have any problem with using protected sources, saying I won't saying in your article that I can't reveal who this is, but often journalists even skip that step. They don't even mention that there was a source.
So your Mongolian is pretty good.
It's okay. I'm conversational. I lived in a community without. There were some English teachers, so that I could speak English there. But day to day, I was dealing with a Mongolian family, and I had to speak with them in their native language. I would say my Mongolian 5 years ago is probably better than today because I don't use it as much. If anyone outside Mongolia is watching this, they might be surprised to learn how popular English language is in this city, how easily you can get by without speaking a word of Mongolian. Even menus will often be presented in English. So that kind of makes you spoiled, maybe lazy to actually get out there and practice your Mongolian. And also, sometimes people are a little bit too enthusiastic to speak English because, I do want my English, I'm sorry, my Mongolian to be there. I want it to be sharp so I can actually practice. But too often, I'm somewhere, maybe a restaurant, and someone's just saying, well, why are you speaking Mongolian? Just speak English with me.
But if you're with the Peace Corps outside of Ulaanbaatar, you learn Mongolian.
Yeah, I think it's definitely helpful, and if you want to be a competent volunteer, actually, making your projects, whether it be small scale or large scale, go forward, you definitely need to be communicating well with the people you're working with because, any civil volunteering, it has to do with working with stakeholders. It's not about bringing your career further because that's not really what it's about. It's about being able to work with people and hopefully leaving them with an experience that they can do these kind of things on their own without